Good evening, I'm Ivan Selin. My employee number is number 1. I had started out in the RAND Corporation after I got my doctorate overseas. I worked for RAND for a few years. I found out that I went out there to do mathematics, and I found out I was a really good second-rate mathematician. There's a lot of demand in the world for second-rate lawyers, for second-rate physicists, for second-rate businessmen, because second rate isn't too bad. Being number 100 on the tennis ladder is quite an achievement. But for mathematicians, there really wasn't any demand for somebody who wasn't among the 20 best in the world. So over time, I started shifting more and more into the work that RAND did for the Air Force, and I started working on defense questions in the area that they hadn't really invented, but they made famous, namely systems analysis. And after a few years, it occurred to me that why am I out in California when all the action is in Washington? We got the opportunity because several RAND alumni moved to Washington when John Kennedy became president and Robert McNamara became Secretary of Defense, to institutionalize systems analysis in the Defense Department. And people I knew, particularly Alan Enthoven, our respected and quite well-loved leader, set up a systems analysis office, and he invited me to come out and become part of the office. So I was ready to go. Once I was working on defense and not math, it seemed to me I should be working where defense action was. After 5 years in the Defense Department in systems analysis, we felt we were getting a little stale. It was time for some new people, and that maybe it wasn't a bad idea to revisit the idea of starting a consulting firm. However, we didn't want to do what we had originally had in mind. We didn't want to be a pure consulting firm, and we wanted to pick the people who would be founders, not based on how senior they were in the systems analysis office, but what it seemed that they could contribute to the company. Now, Charles and I, of course, were the first people who worked out the idea, but very quickly, Jan, Frank, and Pat joined us. And the characteristics that we all had in common were the people we worked with in the Defense Department. They all liked us. They all liked working with us. They thought that we were trying to understand their problems and that we could work with them. Not everybody who had been in systems analysis got along so well with their military colleagues or with people in other departments. And we soon realized that the company we were going to start really shouldn't be a pure consulting company. The whole idea behind AMS was to get some bright people together who like to work with each other, to do something useful, to do something productive, and to make some money along the way. And we would figure it out, and we just kept figuring it out. Yes. The ideas were unbelievably optimistic. I mean, from a planning point of view, we did try to figure out everything that might go wrong, and do we have provisions for these. But emotionally, we never really doubted that, gee, this would work, and if it didn't work, we'll figure out something else that will work. We were gleeful. We were really coming in. The first word that we cared about was our culture, and the culture was to be obviously very people-oriented. We used to say that the only meeting that didn't become a personnel meeting was the meeting that started out already as a personnel meeting. That we would try to get very good people. We would try to treat not only our employees and our colleagues well, but our clients well. That we would be, the jargon is we would be a relational, not a transactional firm. And the business we were going to do wasn't the standard consulting. The whole business strategy was to provide information and eventually systems that would be of long-term value to our clients. So we would do consulting. The consulting we would do would be the standard systems analysis consulting, which means start with the data, start with the client's business, really try to understand the business, and then bring the data to the highest level of the client's management so that the data would have strategic importance for the client. The key to doing this wasn't just to do a consulting arrangement and move on, but to use the consulting information to build and install systems, so that the client would be left with computer systems, with processes, with organizations that would stay on. And so we felt that if we could do something that stayed on, the clients would stay, the relationships would stay, and we would stay. For a while, I did all of the university recruiting. I wasn't alone, I had people with me, but I interviewed just about every candidate, whether it was a computer science person or an MBA. The only way I could see all these people would be if I'd come into an interview and in the first 5 or 10 minutes I decided we weren't going anyplace, was to call the interview off so I'd have more time for the other people. So there were a lot of snap decisions. I know we hired an awful lot of terrific people. I have no idea how many really terrific people I missed because it just doesn't work that way. AMS had two kinds of, or at least people from two backgrounds. We had computer science people and we had people that came from a business or an economics background. At the same time, our staffs had two kinds of people, which more or less lined up. Consultants, the job of a consultant is to take a general principle and see in detail what's special about the client. And computer systems guys, the job of computer systems guys is to take a lot of different questions and try to see what the similarities among them. So I finally came up with a test to figure out how people would fall into these categories. I would show them a number 2 pencil. This is back when we just used plain old graphite encased in wood pencils. And I would show them 2 pencils and I say, would you please compare these 2 pencils for me? And if they told me the ways the 2 pencils were similar, I said, aha, this is a systems guy. And if they told me the way these 2 pencils were different, I said, aha, this is a consulting guy. And people seemed to be pretty happy with the work that we did. Well, our corporate strategy was actually fairly simple. This was a time when there were very few outside software firms. There was only one other company that wasn't associated with an accounting company that was providing large custom-made information systems. That company was CSC, Computer Sciences Corporation. And CSC was a terrific company, but they were much more oriented towards the military than we were, and they were much more oriented at a lower level. We wanted to develop trust with companies based on our past record, be allowed to come in to talk to chairmen and CEOs and division vice presidents, get a feel for what the company was trying to do, get down into the bowels of the company and work with the day-to-day people so we knew what the facts were. In many ways, we had the arrogance to think that we understood the day-to-day operations, at least of the information and financial side, better than some of our clients did. And then provide advice and eventually systems that reflected that. That was almost a unique strategy at the time. AMS's later struggles, in a sense, were the products of our success because a lot of people saw what we were doing and emulated what we were doing. And since we didn't have proprietary software, we were basically no better than the people that we had. Other companies could hire good people, and it got to be a standard way of doing business. A number of people at AMS, including our dear departed Bill Purdy, came up with terrific ideas of how we could help the Navy run its operations in a much more efficient, safer way where their maintenance would be oriented towards reducing risk, not towards carrying out a checklist. And I think the work, the risk-oriented maintenance work we developed for the Navy is still terrific. One time, Charles and I went to call on Continental Airlines, and we started outlining a system we might do for them. And we even said we would try to do this on a fixed price basis. It turned out the system had to solve a problem that nobody had ever solved, and they haven't solved until today. Instead of taking advantage of us, the person we were talking to said, we're not going to let you do that. Your company would go out of business, and we would lose a supplier. And so we worked out something, at his behest, we worked out something more unusual. The second time, we had some problems with a Navy contract, and we just thought that maybe the prices would be too high for the Navy. And so I went to the contracting officer and I offered to cut our overhead rate slightly. He said, absolutely not. He said, you won't be able to do that business. It'll drive you out of business. We want you as a supplier. We'll just work out the work so that we can afford the contract. And the third event is one that's pretty famous in AMS lore, but just in case you haven't heard this. When we first went into business, We had a friend who was working in the state of Illinois in the Budget Bureau, and he invited us to come out. We talked to him, we talked to his boss, a fellow named John McCarter, and they asked us to do a proposal. And we did a proposal. We didn't know what we were talking about. I mean, all we knew about the state budgeting was what we had gotten from, one meeting out there. We sent this proposal in, and John called me up, and instead of throwing us out, he said, look, the only thing in this proposal that's any good are the resumes. So why don't I give you $5,000? You come out, you learn what you're talking about, and give us a real proposal that we can use. And 10 years later, Illinois was still a client of AMS. Well, we always bit off more than we can chew, but we didn't have enough experience to realize what the risks were in a number of these things that we were taking on. By the time, at least during the time I was at AMS, I was at AMS for 18 years in the company. This is our 50th anniversary, so I can only speak to that part of the time. But the time that I was there, we always figured out, if not a solution, at least something that could satisfy the situation. So in retrospect, there were a lot of times we took on more than we should have taken on. But usually, with one or two exceptions, we were able to find some solution that satisfied the clients and that we could afford to carry out. I just read an article about memory and aging, and the key point in the article is you really don't lose your memory as time goes on. The real problem is you start doing things that fall in a rut. So the key thing is not to fall in a rut. Working at AMS was terrific for the memory. Every client, every experience, every employee, every relationship was something new and something memorable. Nothing about AMS ever surprised me. We didn't have clear expectations in terms of finances, how large we were going to be. We weren't debt financed. We had equity financing, so we didn't have to meet quarterly goals, so we would throw off enough cash to meet our debt obligations. AMS was people liked to deal with us. They cited us, they talked about us as a success. It's not the longest lasting, certainly not the most profitable. That wasn't our goal, but the people who worked there kept working there, the company kept growing, clients kept having us back. We didn't have the kind of precise quantitative objectives we needed to have in advance to raise the kind of money that people raise today. We raised a modest amount of money and we lived on that. We didn't spend the investors' money to cover operations, but just to make capital investments. So we were self-financing, and as long as we could keep growing, meeting our financial needs, satisfying our clients, providing a good atmosphere for our colleagues, we were very happy with what we were doing. I just wanted to say how grateful I am to the people, the 5 founders and people like Fred Foreman, who was on almost as quickly. And these are really wonderful people, as good a set of people as I've ever met. Just to give you some example, each of us at the time was married to the same woman we're married to today. We each had one son, we each had one daughter. We were very stable people, even though we were in a very unstable industry. And that stability and set of relationships was not only terrific for AMS, it's been terrific for me personally. So everything that was special about AMS was the culture. We knew that right from the start. And the culture was the people and the relationships. In preparing for this talk, I was thinking a lot about what we were thinking when AMS was started. We were thinking a lot of things, but one of them was not, wow, wouldn't it be terrific to have a 50th reunion? So this has been really a great surprise and a great pleasure. Thank you all for coming and for helping us remember each other and the company that we started together.